It was the summer of 2018 when my friends and I decided to embark on a road trip through the remote backroads of New Mexico. The idea was simple: disconnect from the digital world and explore the less traveled paths of the American Southwest. We packed our bags, stocked up on snacks, and hit the road in an old but reliable minivan. The trip started off well. We marveled at the vast, open landscapes, the red rock formations, and the clear, starry skies at night. But as we ventured deeper into the wilderness, far from any major town or city, an unsettling feeling began to settle over us. The roads became narrower, the towns more sparse, and the cell service non-existent. On the third day, we found ourselves on a particularly desolate stretch of highway, somewhere between Taos and the Colorado border. The sun had just set, leaving the sky a deep, inky black. Our headlights were the only source of light for miles. There were no other cars, no signs of civilization, just us and the road. As we drove, we noticed something strange. The GPS showed a highway intersection up ahead, but as we approached, there was nothing but an empty stretch of road. We shrugged it off as a glitch in the system and continued driving. A few minutes later, the same thing happened. The GPS indicated a left turn onto another highway, but when we arrived, there was no turn, just a straight road leading into the darkness. This time, we grew uneasy. We double-checked the map, but it insisted we were on the right route. It was as if the road itself was shifting, leading us somewhere unknown. Then, out of nowhere, the van's engine sputtered and died. We coasted to a stop on the side of the road, surrounded by nothing but the endless night. We tried restarting the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Panic set in as we realized we were stranded in the middle of nowhere with no cell service and no way to call for help. That's when we saw it. A dim light flickering in the distance just off the side of the road. It looked like a lantern, swaying gently as if someone was walking towards us. Relieved, we thought it might be a nearby farmhouse or a fellow traveler who could help. We decided to walk toward the light. As we got closer, the light seemed to move farther away, leading us deeper into the darkness. We called out, but there was no response. The light just kept moving, always staying just out of reach. After what felt like hours of walking, we found ourselves standing in the middle of a clearing, but there was no light, no farmhouse, nothing, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Suddenly, we heard footsteps behind us. We spun around, expecting to see the person with the lantern, but there was no one there. The footsteps grew louder, circling around us. But no matter how hard we looked, we couldn't see anyone. It was as if we were being watched by something unseen. Terrified, we ran back to the van as fast as we could. When we finally reached it, the engine miraculously started on the first try. Without a word, we sped away, desperate to put as much distance as possible between us and whatever was out there. We drove through the night, never stopping, until we reached a small town at dawn. Exhausted and shaken, we pulled into a diner and tried to make sense of what had happened. When we mentioned the strange road and the flickering light, the waitress's face went pale. "You're lucky you got out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That road's known to be haunted. People have gone missing out there, chasing a light that leads them into the woods. Most are never seen again." We left that diner without finishing our breakfast, the horror of the night before still fresh in our minds. To this day, none of us can explain what we experienced on that lonely highway, but one thing is certain: we'll never set foot on that road again. When I was younger, my family and I went on a road trip to Wyoming to see Yellowstone National Park. It's a beautiful place, and if you haven't seen it yet, I recommend it. Anyways, so from our home in California, it was about a 17-hour drive in our Yukon XL. It took us several days worth of on and off driving to get there, and during the nights we would try to find a little motel to rest at. One of the nights, due to us being behind schedule, My dad attempted to drive through the night to get us there sooner. He made it probably into the wee hours of the night before he deemed it unsafe and parked us in this little unlit rest stop in the middle of the woods in some flyover state. My brothers and I had fallen asleep in the car several hours before he'd stopped, so for at least a couple hours, we were all sleeping in the car in this dark little parking lot surrounded by forest. Having got a couple hours of sleep and being in a pretty uncomfortable position, I woke up in the middle of the night pretty disoriented. I looked around and saw everyone fast asleep in this pitch-black car, and naturally I felt pretty alone. I tried to fall back asleep, but it just wasn't working out, so I just sat there for a while, boredom setting in. Looking out the window to see where we were, it was pitch black, so I couldn't see anything. Luckily, I had brought a couple flashlights in my bag. Being careful not to disturb my sleeping family, I reached into the back seat, unzipped my bag, and pulled out a little plastic yellow flashlight. It wasn't the brightest, but it was enough to see the foreground of the general surroundings. I put it up to the glass, making sure not to make any noise, and pushed the little switch into the on position. I pressed my face against the glass and looked out. At first, it looked like a normal tree line with some bushes, trees, whatever, but as I scanned the darkness, looking for animals, buildings, etc., I noticed this dark shape standing between these two trees in the distance. It looked like the shape of a man, but it wasn't moving, just sitting there. After watching it for a good while and seeing no real signs of movement, I just assumed it was a bush or some kind of natural occurrence. Just as I was about to turn the light off and reattempt sleep, I saw this shadow shape turn 90 degrees and move behind a tree, disappearing from sight. This scared the crap out of me, and I immediately turned off the flashlight and threw my sweater-turned blanket over my head, shut my eyes tightly, and covered my ears. I was paralyzed with fear and, too full of adrenaline to get any sleep, sat in this semi-fetal position, clutching my flashlight for the rest of the night. I waited until the sun came up and we were back on the road before I got any sleep. I didn't tell anybody about the man I saw in the woods. It was winter of 1984. I was waiting for my classes in medical school to start. I'd gone vacationing to a hill station about 250 miles from my hometown. My mother was with me and I was driving my car myself. After staying there for about 3 days, we were returning home. We left during late evening hours. My mother had spent her youth in that region, and she knew a shortcut to our hometown. Upon her suggestion, I took that. However, it did not prove to be a good idea, as it was almost midnight when we reached a part of the road which was single and was hardly used by anyone. It was cold outside, and the road was edged by thick bushes on both sides. So thick were the bushes that no one could enter them without getting hurt. My mother fell asleep on the front seat while I was driving quite vigilantly. Suddenly, I saw a man coming out of the bushes, almost naked, and raised his thumb as if he wanted a lift. However, I did not stop, and the car zoomed by him. However, a realization came to my mind immediately. It was so cold outside in the month of January, but the man I just saw was wearing just a small lungi, a type of loincloth worn by village guys in my country. Also, the bushes on the sides were so thick that nobody could go in or out of those easily or without getting hurt. I immediately looked in the back view mirror. I saw the center of the road in flames. Despite being my claims of being fearless, I was shivering and I drove the car over the ton. My mom woke up and I told her what happened. I was not able to find a logical explanation of the scene. Which one of these stories gave you chills? Kindly be sure to like this video and subscribe for more spooky content. Got a scary story of your own? I'd love to hear it. Send it to bleakscreams@gmail.com and you might see it in a future video. Stay safe out there and keep an eye out for anything strange on your next road trip.